Hey everybody, I'm excited to tell you about this project. I'll sum it up first and then get into the details. The Power of Forests is a vital project working towards protecting our forests and communities from the devastating effects of floods, fire, and drought. By advocating for changes to forestry legislation, we aim to ensure that forests are safeguarded by law and the well-being of our communities is prioritized. Through local events and providing crucial information, we'll empower communities to influence politicians to create a new Forest Act and make a lasting impact on our natural surroundings. We invite you to join us in this important movement as we unite people to build a voice in influencing our policymakers. Our ultimate goal is to harness the power of forests together for a safer and more resilient future. Now, initially, this project was called The Power of Trees. But as most of you here already know, a forest isn't just the trees. There are a lot of elements involved, including the soils, the microorganisms, the processes, and the relationships. And one of the most important relationships is the relationship between humans and the forest. Forests bring us rain. They manage our water for us, and they must be protected by law. Decades of overcutting from industrial logging have resulted in enormous losses of primary natural forests, and communities and Indigenous groups on the land are paying the price. People across BC are making grassroots efforts to address the negative impacts of industrial forestry in their communities, but the BC government is not taking action to protect people by changing forestry practices. As a result of too much of what's on the left of this screen, we're getting more and more of what's happening on the right. More fires, more drought, and bigger and more frequent floods. I'm one of the people who was impacted by this. In 2018, my house was hit by the catastrophic flood that hit 400 homes in Grand Forks. This is why I got involved in forestry reform. Some retired loggers took me on a tour of our watershed and showed me the massive levels of clear-cut logging. It wasn't an easy thing to look at. And then forest ecologist Herb Hammond and hydrologist Martin Watts showed me the science connecting industrial forestry and flooding. I'm sure many of you here today also have a personal reason that you're involved in forestry reform. For some, it's simply a love of bears. And for some, it's the sadness that you feel when you see trees that you consider your friends being cut down. When it comes to the science and the data and the common sense, demonstrating the problems arising from too much being cut down, government prefers to raise their hands up and exclaim, climate change is to blame for all of this. But you don't have to be a scientist to know that when this kind of clear cutting and forestry road building is happening all over BC, it's going to have an impact on floods and drought cycles. There's more than enough data, too much to go into in this brief presentation, to demonstrate the connection between industrial forestry and the problems in BC communities. Scientists like Dr. Alila have been raising the alarm, but the government is ignoring the science and the data. Why is this? Well, there's a powerful forestry lobby in BC. Back in the early 2000s, they influenced government to have forestry legislation changed to favor them. So provincial forestry legislation mandates that decisions about logging on public lands are made by timber companies and based on profit considerations. The people who are out on the land making decisions about where and how much to log are trained to extract fiber as quickly as possible for the lowest cost. Other values like biodiversity, wildlife, and community safety are rarely taken into consideration. Anyone who's gone up against BCTS knows this. Forest protectors are also up against public misconception that's manufactured by the forestry lobby. For example, many people believe that tree plantations offer the same benefits as natural forests, but they don't function the same way as biodiverse natural forests or offer the same protection against fires, floods, or drought. Another misconception is that forestry is still a big part of the BC economy, and without it, the economy will suffer. The truth is that while forestry used to make a significant contribution to the province's economy, it no longer does. As of 2019, forestry only made up less than 3% of the BC GDP, and the industry was only supplying 1.9% of the jobs. Those numbers have gone down since then. Okay, so who can change forestry? Well, the BC government has the power to correct damaging forestry practices by changing the legislation that props them up, but it's choosing not to. There's simply no political will to do this. Nothing changes until the legislation changes. In BC, there's a clear case for generating the political will to change legislation, and it has to be generated by the people, the voters. Nobody's coming to save us. It's time to demand laws that safeguard our forests. They are our life support system, and they're too valuable to be destroyed in this way. So we've come up with a plan, and we're taking action to make it happen. The aim of this game-changing citizens campaign is to unify and to send a clear single message to our politicians. Communities and forests must be protected by the creation of a new Forest Act. Now, a Forest Act will be a complex document. At this point, we're going to avoid getting bogged down by trying to write out all the details. That comes later, and the government has legal staff to do this. We can't afford any more stalling. For now, we need to build momentum for this tremendous shift by keeping the message focused on the three key priorities of the new Forest Act. The first and overarching priority is to enshrine in law that all forestry decisions are based on ecosystem and conservation science rather than timber supply considerations. This is an umbrella policy that applies to everything else that comes after it. So how might this look on the ground? There must be an immediate stop to the logging of primary forests. And then decisions about logging in secondary forests must be based on ecosystem and conservation science, which will not only protect ecosystem integrity, but also prioritize community safety. For example, by taking into account hydrological data and the effects of whatever logging they're choosing to do on the hydrology of the region. The second priority is a recentering of forestry decision-making that allows the public, including Indigenous groups, to participate. The third is an economic consideration to support local economies. And that is that the government eliminates monopolies and instead incentivizes and supports small to medium local businesses doing forestry, conservation, and restoration work. And of course, it's an act in law, so there'll be enforceability. And that's something that's sorely missing in BC government forestry policy and practices right now. All right, so how are we going to make this meaningful work happen? We're doing it in 3 phases. The first phase is currently underway. We're preparing by gathering information about the forestry legislation, the science, and how to shift political will. We're also going to reach out to communities and Indigenous groups that need this help the most. And then we move into phase 2, which is the meat and potatoes of this campaign. We'll activate the community by holding regional events. We take this right to the people where they live. We'll invite and involve local and Indigenous groups to collaborate on organizing and hosting an event in their region. We'll rally people with presentations from scientists and local leaders. We'll talk about the new Forest Act and what it entails, and equip people with information and facts to take to their local politicians, as well as the best methods and language to get buy-in from politicians. We'll guide people through the steps of how to directly meet with and lobby their MLAs. Face-to-face meetings are essential. It's gotten too easy for politicians to ignore emails and petitions. Not that we should stop doing that, but we're competing with lobbyists who meet with policymakers in person on a regular basis. And not only at formal meetings, but also at receptions and extracurricular activities together. Here's a picture of Diane Nichols, the former Chief Forester of BC, hanging out with what she called her leadership team. and they were all head honchos from private forestry corporations. We have to meet directly with MLAs or our voices will get lost in the digital noise. As voters, we have power, and we have to ensure that elected officials remember that. People have said to me, aren't you preaching to the choir? And what we're doing here is we're getting the choir to all sing the same song. Groups and people right now are working in isolation, and as a result, their voices aren't being heard, and the forests continue to come down. Grassroots groups have an unwavering commitment to the communities they serve. We're leveraging this to influence decision makers. There are a lot of people who care about this issue and can't get directly involved because they have full-time jobs and families, but they want to help make this work happen. You can help us to make this movement a success by giving to this campaign. We've had some generous BC residents already donate. Plus, we've got a donor who's pledged to give $50,000 and another donor who's pledged to give $20,000. So let's raise our voices and advocate for laws to protect our forests and our communities. We need to make a change before it's too late. Are you with us? Give to the campaign and let's make this change together. You can visit our website at boundaryforest.org, or you can send a donation via e-transfer to boundaryforests@gmail.com. All right, thank you for listening. And if you're here, you're probably already making a contribution to making this a better world. And I'm honored to be sharing this time with you, albeit digitally, and thank you very much for coming.